Hey there! So glad you're here for another episode of Becoming More Me. Super excited to introduce you to Nick Fransen this week. Now, Nick is a licensed acupuncturist and functional medicine specialist who's gathered experiences from all over the world as he has worked very hard as a parent to get his son the treatment he needed for autism. He's also the founder of Privia Naturals supplements or homeopathics. We're going to be talking more about that and what kind of homeopathic remedies and solutions his company offers, as well as the value of homeopathics, how they're created, why they work so well, and why something that is so diluted can make such a difference. Now, for over a decade, Nick's been on a mission, helping over 1,000 people to break free from their negative subconscious blocks. Now, whether that's overcoming financial hurdles, improving relationships, tackling past traumas, it's all in a day's work for him. And I can say the same for myself. So I'm super excited to see where our paths intersect. Nick's collaborated with top-notch doctors globally, and through Privia Naturals, he's bringing cutting-edge European homeopathic supplements and therapies to U.S. practitioners. He specializes in emotional trauma, depression, anxiety, pain, autoimmune diseases, and autism. And it's not just about treatments for Nick. It's about understanding that our body keeps the score and, things like migraine, sleep trouble, addiction. Nick unveils the connection between these and the subconscious programming linked to past trauma. This is so very much my mission too. So I'm really excited to see where this conversation leads. So get ready. We're going to dive into these secrets, these breakthroughs, what these homeopathic supplements can do for us, and why traditional methods fall short, as well as how you can upgrade your mindset to break free from these hardwired beliefs too. So get ready for some wisdom and wit as we go deep into the world of holistic healing. Hi, Nick. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Teresa, really great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely. I'm truly excited for this conversation. I think it's going to open up some new doors for a lot of people. So tell me a little bit, just to kind of break the ice and get things started, about who you are, where you live, what your day-to-day is like now in your life.
Yeah, so I live in Boise, Idaho. I am an Idaho native. There's not very many of us around these days. Most everyone has moved from California or Oregon or Washington. So there's very few natives. But yeah, so I own a company called Privia Naturals. We've imported and brought in a special product line out of Switzerland. It's all natural, really designed to treat some deep-seated emotional conditions. So I see patients and do a lot of work with other practitioners and training, helping them to integrate this sort of stuff into their practice.
That sounds really cool. And I originally had heard about the work that you did through our mutual connection, Dr. Janine Kraus. So I know that if Dr. J thinks it's a good thing, that I need to learn more about it. So how did you come into this line of work that you're doing now with Privia Naturals?
So years and years ago, I began my journey in the pharmaceutical industry. And over a few years, I kind of became pretty disenchanted with that whole arena and what was happening there.
Yeah.
And modulated out of that, I had a son who was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3, and this really turned my life completely around and upside down, really, and evaluating what I was doing and also what I was going to do to help him get better, essentially.
Mhm.
So he's 19 years old now. He does
Okay.
really, really well. He's not completely typical, but he can ski diamond a black diamond. He can ride a skateboard. He can run a 5K. So he does and functions fairly well. But during this time, I really began to be introduced into the field of natural medicine and the potentials that were there. I ended up quitting that job with pharmaceutical industry and moving into a company as a representative for some product lines out of Europe. So this is where I was first introduced to the product line that I'm now working with directly. And I used to travel around the United States and Canada, and I would train doctors and chiropractors and acupuncturists and health coaches and how to use this particular method, and how it can benefit their patients and what they do. So that's just kind of a little background of how I ended up into this, and my son being really the catalyst for a lot of what's happened.
Did it take a lot to get him from where he was at diagnosis at age 3 to all of the capabilities and developments he's grown into at 19?
Yeah, it did take a lot. And in fact, it was all the doctor visits and everything that really got me interested in this field. And so often, as a lot of us, we ended up taking something that happened to us and then making a career out of it,
Sure.
So that happens quite frequently. He's been to Ukraine for stem cells about a decade ago. He's been to India. He's been to Mexico several times. Many of the top doctors here across the US. He's been poked with every different natural medicine you can find. He's had all kinds of supplements he's taken. He does really well. He's still not, what you would call a typical child, but he functions very well. But there were so many things and tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, there's probably,
Sure.
probably a couple $100,000 spent over a period of 15 years to try to really find out what would be beneficial for him.
Yeah. Not to mention all of
Um,
the time. And as parents, the amount of time we have to spend advocating for our kids can be really a lot.
Right. Yeah, most
So,
parents are willing to spend whatever they got to spend to help our children, and that's really where it became, and we rubber met the road on that particular issue.
yeah, for sure. So, what kind of things did you find in your travels to be the most helpful, if not for his particular conditions, like just in general? Were there things that your eyes were open to that you hadn't seen used before?
Yeah, there was lots of things that I hadn't seen before, right? The trip to Ukraine for the stem cells was pretty interesting. India was a unique homeopathic treatment that was being used over there. There are all kinds of things in Mexico. I think we had some shark cells that we injected at one point. And so there's just so much that's out there. And when you really begin to expose to it, I mean, I went to probably personally, 150 conferences, for integrative medical doctors, naturopathic doctors, chiropractors, and lots of people are showing up trying to sell their stuff or promote their new therapies. Some are not very good and some are revolutionary. And so many different therapies that work and can really help a child with autism really get over the edge and live a completely different kind of life than maybe what the mainstream medical establishment has sort of forecasted them to live.
Absolutely. And during that time, is that when you became involved in acupuncture yourself and like chiropractic and all of those kind of things?
Right. So I'm a licensed acupuncturist, and it was during that time that I thought, some of this stuff's kind of cool. Maybe I should go back to school, right? And so I looked at different options, and acupuncture school seemed like a good route to go. And so that's the one that I took.
Yeah, awesome. So I do a lot of work myself with the subconscious mind and with our nervous system. And I work mainly with professional entrepreneurial women, and a lot of which, like me, also have ADHD, and kind of breaking through limiting beliefs and up leveling and learning to slow down. Honestly, that's that's a big thing that I think most of us are going full speed ahead, not realizing how
Right.
much of a negative effect it has on our bodies and our minds and our nervous systems. So I'd love to start to talk a little bit about these therapies that you're loving so much these days and helping people to make breakthroughs with, because I think the breakthroughs are things that the kind of people that are like me are really going to benefit from too.
Well, this is a really fantastic subject, and we can go in so many different directions, right? So while um, I was working for this company out of Germany, and they had a doctor, Dr. Reimer Banis, had developed a unique line of treatment methods, homeopathics, really, that were designed to treat deep emotional issues. He was a doctor, and we've all heard of Bach flower remedies, right? We can pick them
Yeah.
up at the grocery store, and we know that they work, and they're diluted essences of flowers. A fantastic idea. But here, just not that long ago, 25 years ago, Bach was fairly unique. It definitely hadn't made it to the United States. And this particular doctor was using Bach flower remedies as a main treatment method in his practice. And his practice was mainly full of women. And he would find that they would get good results for about a month or two, and then they would seem to backslide into the same sort of pattern. And it felt like that it just wasn't going deep enough. So he began the theory of just taking a bunch of, using some testing to find and drive a little deeper with higher potencies that can work on more of an emotional level when it comes to homeopathics. And he was able to he created a product line that really had the ability to go deep into an individual's subconscious and root out some of these self-defeating belief patterns that affect our relationships. Um, they affect our physical health. That's mainly what he was after, is what we call psychosomatic illnesses.
Hmm.
Psyche, mind, soma, body, that many of the physical ailments that we deal with may actually have roots in old emotional conditions or old beliefs that keep us in this sort of a position. So he got invited onto a equivalent of Oprah in Germany, sort of a program, and it took off like wildfire in Europe. So over there they have over 2,000 trained practitioners. Um, they have what's unique about the method is this isn't just a fun idea, right? Where we think, oh, this is great, we can do this. We have 300 articles been published in multiple journals. We've got 11 clinical studies, 8 books. So this is a method that's not just a fun idea, but it packs a real punch with some proof that what we're talking about is really attainable.
That's so cool. So, what are some of these things made out of? What is in these particular supplements? We call them a supplement?
We can call them supplements. They're really homeopathics. And if
Okay,
someone's
homeopathics.
not
And
familiar with that particular term,
I'm
question,
familiar. I was just going to ask you and kind of interrupt and ask if you could kind of explain. I know how
right?
this works, but I know a lot of listeners, when people think of like the Bach flower remedies, I know people are like, how does this diluted thing that's like just this itty bitty little bit of something do anything? So could you help to shed some light on the reasoning and the science behind that?
Right. So, in a nutshell, we want to think electromagnetic. We cannot see the radio frequencies that we transmit through our homes and our cars from the radio station, yet they exist.
Right.
And these frequencies at certain wavelengths can be very powerful on the physical body. So it began with a guy, and I'll just try to make this short. Samuel Hahnemann. This is probably 200 years ago. So this is, homeopathy's been around for a long time. He was a professor at a medical college, and he began experimenting with different diluted substances. Okay. And so, for example, let's say you and I, we go out in your backyard in the winter time where you're at, and maybe we take the bark off of a tree. We bring that in, we put it in a little bottle of alcohol and water, we let it sit for a little while. And then we take one drop out of that solution, we put it in a clean bottle of water and alcohol. Take a drop out of that, another clean one. That's number 3, 4, 5. That's why you may see something in the store that says 10x. That's been diluted 10 times. And we can go up to 100x, or we can go, potencies change from LMs to DMs to X's to C's. They can go very differently. If we want to treat something on a physical level, we'll go with an X potency. If we want to work on the mind or even on something deep spiritual, we're going to go a much higher vibrational frequency, which is a higher dilution. Hahnemann began to find out that, wow, there was really power behind this. There was a doctor in France, Dr. Baptiste, I believe. He had run these same sort of experiments and found that you could make a significant biological change with a 7x potency that was measurable, that would degranulate um, certain immune cells. B cells, I can't remember which ones it was. Fibroblasts? No, it wasn't fibroblasts. It was an immune cell.
Okay.
So homeopathy is a frequency-based medicine made out of natural substances that, when it interacts with our body, can stimulate change.
Great explanation. Thank you for making that clearer. And now my ADHD brain needs to get back to what we were talking about before that.
I'm hoping that made it clear, because it
It
can be a
definitely made
difficult
it
one.
clear. So what is in the homeopathics that you're working with nowadays?
Yeah, so this particular line of homeopathic, there's about 40 different remedies. These products can range in in ingredients. One particular remedy may contain 5 different ingredients at various levels of potencies. Homeopathics can be made out of anything. They can be made out of minerals because there's no natural real substance in it anymore. It's just the electromagnetic signature associated with that ingredient. So it can be made out of tissues. It can be made out of um, plants, animal material, whatever it might be. So some of these have specific plant remedies that are in them that have been diluted. Some have different animal remedies. Some have tissues in them. So the ingredients are very large. But what's unique is the U.S. actually approved, it's all approved by the FDA. Homeopathy is. It was grandfathered in the 1940s when the FDA took over, because here in the U.S. it was full of homeopathic medical schools.
Hmm.
And it was a huge thing here in the US. And it wasn't until the invention of antibiotics and the ability to profit from something like this that now created the FDA, created the AMA, American Medical Association, and a patented university method of treating. You want to use our drugs, you need to go to our schools. And so homeopathic schools began to disappear, and we have what we have today.
For better or worse, right?
Correct.
Um, okay, so what has your experience been using these kind of products?
So what's unique about this is sort of the approach. So you usually have to meet with a practitioner, and there's a little bit of testing that's involved. We can do it remotely, so that's a possibility.
What kind of
I
testing? Are we talking
remember
like muscle testing or
we do
that
we
kind of
use it
stuff?
we use what we call an arm length reflex test. It's a
Okay.
specific kind of muscle test that's not the typical push down, lift up sort of thing. It has to do with a resonance with the sympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
So we of course like to do these in person if we can, but I remember said, all right, you're going to be working with these, so sit down. You need to try them. So I'm like, all right, fine. So I sit down and they do some testing and they say, all right, your first emotional issue that wants to be dealt with has to do with being isolated, an isolated individual. And I thought, I'm not really that isolated of an individual. I grew up on a potato farm in Idaho. I had a great childhood. I had great parents, fantastic siblings. I was really lucky. A little teeny town. I had 64 in my graduating class. I mean, the worst thing we could do is climb the water tower, steal stop signs, and kiss too many girls. I mean, I mean, I had a really good childhood. I'm like, I'm not really that isolated of a person, but give me the remedies. So they're homeopathic, so you just take they're drops, right? You dump them a little few drops in a small glass of water and you drink the water a couple times a day. One of the biggest side effects that one is going to experience is vivid dreaming. It seems like it has the ability to go really deep. So, usually in the first couple weeks, the dreams will occur. I had a dream that really shocked me. And for me, it was an old memory.
Hmm.
And I saw myself probably 8 or 9, and I was going outside to play baseball with some of my buddies, and they started making fun of me. And it was like I was there, Teresa. I mean, like I was watching the whole thing, and I saw myself turn around, just go over to the monkey bars and go play with somebody else. I probably had not thought about that particular incident since it had happened. But over the ensuing months, these remedies have a tendency to just be able to they change how you think, really. And you begin to realize, you know what? I need to engage more. I do isolate myself on certain circumstances or certain issues. And this can happen depending on what the issues are. You know, maybe your issue is I swallow my feelings and I don't speak my voice. Maybe an issue is a deep-rooted self-esteem problem. So we have 28 of these remedies with all these varying emotional issues. But that was the first experience for me that clued me in like, oh, this is just not some pie in the sky idea, but there's something really behind this.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I'm always kind of like looking at ways to go deeper when I'm working with the subconscious mind. This seems like something that might just open things up even more for people. Do you use these sort of things in conjunction with different therapies or modalities? Because I would imagine a lot of people are not conscious enough or, aware enough to understand the connection and make the connecting of the dots the way that you may have done in the situation with your dream.
No, you're very, very, that's a very true statement because a lot of times the way out is often the way through, is it not? And sometimes
And we're all just
you
walking each other home, right?
right, and sometimes these remedies have the ability to stir up some stuff that needs to be dealt with. And so, if there's not a practitioner who is on board, who knows kind of what they're doing, and it tells the patient, hey, here's what could happen, could be a little more emotional than normal.
Right.
Your physical condition could get worse before it gets better. It's not this steep climb all in a one directional 45-degree angle. It's up and then there's some valleys and then it goes up and then we go down. And so
Oh, it's
these
kind of like
peaks
life,
and
huh?
valleys, unfortunately, I wish somebody had made that easier and maybe just a straight upswing. So,
I find that the value comes in the speed at which we get through things. That's one of the things that I feel like people definitely undervalue when it comes to subconscious or nervous system work, is like when I would typically get hung up on something a decade or more ago when I wasn't really using these sort of modalities. I'd get stuck for a much longer period of time. I might understand the way through, but not have the know-how to navigate it. But now, when something that would have just completely like knocked me off my center happens, it's a much quicker recovery and a much faster path through. Is that something that you experience with these homeopathics?
yeah, very much so. I mean, the way you explained it is really perfectly because a lot of times if you can you don't always with these remedies you don't always recognize what's happening because it's slow, right? It's not like, "Ooh, I had that dream and this changed my life." It begins to change who you are, and other people will often notice before you actually notice. And I have had some therapists who have commented and said, "Look, I can get through 3 years of therapy in 6 months if they're on these remedies. We can make
Right.
that much faster progress because they're more open to seeing and we're discovering things that weren't really there before. Because in therapy, you can only work on what you consciously are aware of and that what you're dealing with and struggling with. And as you know, these subconscious things are not always on the radar of here's my problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned before about like the Bach flower remedies, and it sounds kind of like they're kind of like the talk therapy version of a remedy, whereas the remedies that you're talking about, the homeopathics that you're talking about, are more like the hypnotherapy of the homeopathic world that are going deeper. What's the difference between the two? Like with them both being homeopathics, what makes these so much different?
Right. So ingredients. So there's much more robust ingredients in these particular ones. And Bach flower is not, they're not highly diluted. So they're not really designed to really go extremely deep. Because remember in homeopathy, the more it's potentized, the more it creates what we call nanoparticles. It's been proven now. Homeopathy people like, oh, it's a pseudoscience. No, there's research now that shows that it creates nanoparticles that emit electromagnetic frequencies, and that's how a lot of cells will actually communicate. So it's very realistic. It's very proven. But as you continually potentize or you have these deeper potencies, they will work on a much more of a psychological level. And box doesn't get quite that deep. That's the only difference, right? Ingredients that go deeper and are really designed to react a more deeper change than just, I feel better today.
Yeah. So how do these help to break subconscious patterns?
Well, let's look at a couple of things first. I think, how do we form these subconscious blocks, right? For me, there's three ways that I've looked at. Trauma is number one, right? When we undergo something that has a traumatic event, whether it's emotional or physical, right? Whatever it might be, that alters brain chemistry. It creates physical responses where cortisol levels can be elevated and stay elevated for a very, very long time if they're not properly worked out. But these trauma events teach us here's how the world works, and it's dangerous. Therefore, you need to protect yourself and act accordingly.
Right.
Don't put yourself in that situation again. If there's anything remotely similar to that situation, even if it's non-threatening, it can still trigger a panic attack that, oh my gosh, this is resembling, and and this can go on for years, right? Where we may be in the pattern where we're like, I don't even know why I react that way. We've lost the initial traumatic incident and what goes with that, but we still are affected by how this affects our decision making and how we react to certain things. So trauma is number one. Number two is learned behavior that we accept to be true that may not always be true, right? So I'll give you an example. I had a woman one time who had a severe eating disorder. All right. 10 years, lots of binging eating, lots of super struggles, right? And while she was on the remedies, she came to the realization this is, she said, I remember when this started and I know what triggered this. She said, I was a track star. And I got on and we were going to do a weigh-in for some reason that day. And coach, I got on the scale and I was in great shape. I had no issues. And coach said, you're 3 pounds overweight. And for her, that was a learned belief that she accepted. And how am I going to get this? How am I going to change this? And this created a belief system and a pattern that led her down a road that was destructive. Okay. So those are subconscious belief patterns. And then inherited. We get great stuff from our parents, right? Sometimes it's great and good and helpful, and other times not so much. And this brings to mind Rachel Yehuda, who did the study on Holocaust survivors, Jewish Holocaust survivors, who showed that those individuals who'd been through the Holocaust had children, and those children naturally had higher levels of cortisol than did their peers who maybe their parents did not go through a concentration camp experience. So they passed on to them, I'm a little more anxious. I'm a little more on edge, right? Um,
I
but
forget
on
the
the flip,
exact numbers, but that kind of stuff can pass through, I think, like 10 generations.
right, until it can be broken, right? But on the flip side, we want to look at the resiliency gene too. What if you had parents who, they crossed the plains, and they were hardworking and they met their struggles and they overcame them. That resiliency gets passed on to the kids.
Right.
Okay. And that's something that, we can say they're driven, they're strong, so we want to look at that at both sides, but that's how these subconscious blocks can form. And which leads me back to, I forgot what your original question was because we got going on this particular issue.
Lord
But
help me if I can remember it either, Nick. That's
right,
not my strong suit.
right. So
I think we
so
were talking about breaking subconscious blocks
right.
and
So
kind of getting to the bottom of things and how these particular homeopathics assist with that.
well, therapy is really designed to try to get to the bottom of that, but consciously we're not always able to recall what the issues might be or how they interweave together.
Right.
Hypnosis is a great way to do it because it can take us into a place where that can be done. And our remedies, do exactly just that. They seem to, in the testing, we find the particular emotions that this person wants to deal with. And then those drops allow these things to kind of surface and kind of manifest, come to into the conscious so we can now recognize, yeah, I do behave badly. I had a patient who the other day we were talking and she says, I really need help with my relationships. She goes, my daughter doesn't want a relationship with me, adult daughter. And she says, I say hurtful things and I don't mean to. And I don't mean to say these things, but sometimes they just kind of come out. And now she doesn't want anything to do with me anymore because I just can't, I can't, I can't maintain this relationship in a healthy way. And now she won't let me see our granddaughter. And this is really hurting me. And here she is. Where does this go? Where did this start? Right? I'm
Mhm.
sure with some hypnosis, I'm sure with some of these remedies, she would begin to connect. Yeah, I remember when this happened. I don't need to be bound by this anymore. Right? I recognize that my behavior is not healthy and I can make that change. So that's kind of a little bit about how this works.
Yeah, that's awesome. Any other cool customer experiences or client testimonials or things
Oh,
that
I
kind of
mean,
connect the dots if you're thinking about like
we
maybe
have,
like with like things that are I always like to think about how these things work with the things that are less tangible because I always say with my line of work, it's like it's really easy to like see how it works if like we're using EFT tapping for like a headache or something that like I can understand immediately this is working. But then like when I'm dealing with things like people's money blocks or their financial issues or their
right.
relationship patterns or the things that are a little bit less tangible or a little harder to test in the moment until the thing that would normally happen happens again. You have any good examples there?
Yeah, well, so much of that is true, right? I mean, we don't just have to be sick to have subconscious blocks that need to be dealt with, right? It affects our relationships with with our children, with our siblings, with our spouses, whatever it might be. Um, and money blocks is a huge one, right? Some people, particularly in the therapy healing industry, some people will be like, I can't charge that. It's not capable. I want my services to be for everybody. And while that's altruistic, it may not always be in the best interest of the individual. We had this is from a performance base and kind of fun story. We
Yeah.
This works with animals as well.
Oh, cool.
So we had a thoroughbred Kentucky Derby horse racing story, right? So we had a guy who is anyone that knows a little about thoroughbreds and racing, are very antsy, anxiety-ridden animals, and they're really
Yeah.
high-strung. And we had a horse owner who said, "I want to try this on some of my racing horses." And so we had, found which particular way to test to find which sort of emotional issue would be best. And this guy started winning races, and he was doing really well. And Dr. Bannis at the time said, "Yeah, we'd love to, treat some of your friends. You got some other, horse owners who'd like to do this." And he was like, "We don't share this secret."
Well,
And
might be out of the bag now.
he would not let go, because this was an advantage to him. But it was substantial enough that the horse was winning some races and doing really well. And he
That's really
attributed
cool.
that to the emotional well-being of the animal.
How do you test the emotional responses of a horse?
We all know animals have emotions, right?
Sure.
We have dogs and things like that. So there's a way that we test with some certain vials to kind of direct it that that's who we're kind of testing instead of, using the actual limbs of the animal, for example.
Right. I was there, yeah, because there's different smaller animals. I could envision different ways it could be done, but with a larger animal like a
Right.
horse, I was at a little bit of a
A
loss.
little difficult, a little
Yeah,
difficult.
but you figured
But
it
yeah,
out.
there's lots of fun stories like that, so many. I had one practitioner tell me the other day, she she had treated a police officer, and this police officer was, pretty hardened sort of guy, and he had come in after 3 months. We want the therapy is really designed for about a year and a half. Okay. So you're going to get results, but the longer you on it, the deeper you typically go. So think of it like an onion layer. You may go on a particular emotional set of remedies to deal with isolation, like in my example, for 3 months. After that's gone, we onion layer, we peeled that, we're going to go deeper, we're going to go deeper. So the real changes I have found seem to be like that 7, 8, 9 month mark where there's some really big things happen. But this guy was on it, and he came in after about 2 or 3 months to change and go to a new set of remedies. And she asked him, "Have you noticed anything different?" He goes, "No, not really." typical, guy response, not really in touch with what's happening. He goes, but the other day I was at the front desk where all the girls are and where we run all everything, and they out of the blue said, "Hey, we don't know what you're doing, but just keep doing it. We like you a whole lot better." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So he's like, "They must be working." So, there's things like that. This sometimes it's imperceptible, but very noticeable to those who live with you or who spend
Yeah.
a significant amount of time with you, right?
For sure. Well, I hope he went back to those people at the front desk and got some more information about what they were noticing, because that's like super
Right.
valuable. But that's great that, I mean, at least he was cognizant enough to be able to understand that there were things happening, even if he wasn't aware of them.
Yeah.
So that's super cool. So about a year and a half to get the best results.
Correct.
What's typically happening in those first few like weeks or months? Were people still
Well,
like working with people?
like
Had
the
you worked
example I gave of myself, things can happen fairly rapidly. Okay. But as you further go on, it just goes deeper. Like it feels, you will get things where you're like, oh, well, that person is just an angry person. It's just how he is. But the longer you go in, you might realize this personality is really just a pseudo personality of who he is. It's just a conglomeration of learned behavior and traumatic experiences, and he can be freed from that, for example. So um, it just goes deeper. It's really hard to explain, but
Yeah, I understand.
um,
It
people
sounds kind of
just,
like a understanding your truth better sort of serum.
it's a very much getting to who you really are, and you strip away all the stuff you learned, right? So I'm from, my own personal perspective, that 8 or 9 month mark for me, I grew up in a religious home. I grew up Mormon. Great, like I said, amazing parents, family, and the religion has served me very well. I still am Mormon, but not quite like I used to be. Um, and when I took these remedies, I was, probably in my mid 30s at the time. And I had never really doubted my religious upbringing. It had served me well. I had made pretty good decisions, and it was a big part of who I was and my life. But somewhere around that 8 or 9 month mark, I remember getting up early on a Saturday morning to go to a little meeting that I always went to. And I got in the car, and I remember thinking to myself, it was like I heard a voice. And it was just like, what in the world are you doing? And it was sort of shocking because I had never, ever would I have questioned what I was doing from a religious standpoint. Got out of my car, I went back in, I went back to bed. And then over the ensuing months, I began to question a lot of things that I was brought up with, teachings that I never would have doubted or had a concern about. Now I had issues with. And I remember thinking, where's this coming from? And it took a while, right? Because I'm not working with a therapist, working through something. I just remember thinking at one point, it's those damn drops. It's those remedies. That's what this is doing. And so for me, I I I, I went from an external sort of religious sort of thing to where I kind of rid myself a lot of the dot the I's and cross the T's to more of an internal, uh, kind of a faith-based relationship sort of
Yeah.
issue. So for me, that particular instance was profound. It
Yeah.
was life-changing. It took something that was really a core part of who I was, ripped it away, and remade it into something better.
That's awesome. So that you were just left with what was really serving you, not just all the habits and patterns and stuff that's been ingrained
Right.
because it's just what you did every week or every day as a
hmm
child.
I was also able to see more clearly instead of just this is all horrible and this is terrible and it's oppressed me. I was able to say, no, there's been some good things. Yeah, there's been some things that are bad or are not true. But for me, it just, I was able to see clearly, and that's really what it did.
Yeah. How do these homeopathics help with things like anxiety?
Anxiety is a very common sort of symptom. Obviously, that anxiety is often rooted in something much deeper. Uh, Quite frequently, we can say, I have anxiety because my mom has anxiety, my sister, my aunts have anxiety, my grandma, often inherited. There's something there that may need to be broken. So dealing with the deep-seated emotional issues are really at the roots of trying to fix that issue. We also have one specific remedy called Anxiovita. It is a very high potency, symptomatic sort of remedy. So it can be used, it's not designed to treat old emotional issues. It's just like, you need help. You need help right now getting out of this anxiousness that you're in. Take this. We've coined the term, it's a natural Xanax. I'm not sure that I can
Mm.
say that. It is off patent though, so maybe that's okay. So, but outstanding. It's our number one selling remedy. It's fantastic for people suffering with anxiety. It's great to use here and now, but we don't want to not treat the deeper underlying issues that may be at the roots of that anxiety issue.
I love that because also been paralleling kind of what I do and what you're doing. I always say, like with emotional freedom techniques, we can use it like a band-aid right now. We can knock that anxiety down so that you feel better in the moment. And then while we've got you in that nice space, we can go deeper because you're feeling more calm and relaxed and able
Mhm.
to explore things on a deeper level. So it sounds like with those combination of things, you have that kind of the band-aid, which we would never deny ourselves a band-aid when we have something that's
Right,
bothering us in the moment,
right.
and then the ability to potentially not need the band-aid in the future by going deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And we love all these therapies, EFT, hypnosis, whatever it is. We ask people, hey, you know what? Try our remedies. See if we can't add to
Yeah,
what you're doing. See if we
I
can't
love
help you
it.
go to the next level, right? There's no reason to slam or compare. It's
Yeah.
just, let's see if this will take you to the next level. And I agree with you also with, the Band-Aid sort of issues because um, I if I'm hurt, I'm grateful for modern medicine. And I'm in a car accident, I'm in the ER, I'm happy to take morphine to
Yep.
get me out of pain in or incidents, right? I think it becomes a problem when we start to use some of those sort of things to treat long-standing chronic conditions, which really is a long-term band-aid that is not going to work. So it has its place. I'm very grateful for Western medicine and what we've accomplished and used, but I want to try everything else first, please.
Yes. I 100% agree. And I love anything where we can combine or whatever and make things better. I think better is just a wonderful word. And, a way it sounds like what you're providing through Privia Naturals is a way to make a lot of things better. So, how can people find out more about this if they want to learn more?
Right. So, Privia Naturals, Privia Naturals with an S.com. That is our main site. We have a webinar there for patients that they can watch if they want to know a little bit more. They can book an appointment and chat with me directly. Yeah, we have lots of things they can order. The deep emotional stuff is reserved for practitioners. Excuse me, but the acute remedies, the Anxiovita and some of these, there's five of them. They're really great. They can be ordered directly from the website. So those are a place where we can be found.
Awesome. I will make sure all of that is in the show notes. Is there anything else that listeners should know or anything else that you want to talk on before we wrap things up?
No, I think it's a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for letting me come on.
Oh, thanks so much for being here and opening our minds to this new way of making so many things better. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Thanks for spending some of your precious time with me today. If you loved this episode, please leave a review or simply share it with someone else who would get great benefit from it too. If you share on social media, please tag me so I can personally connect and thank you. Until next time, keep taking bold and brave steps towards becoming more of who you want to be in this world. You are capable, you are worthy, and you are enough. And if your inner critic is still trying to argue with those facts, hit me up. We've got work to do.